Hey, 8th grade. Today I'm going to be working with you on some tips on how to craft a constructive speech for your debate. Remember, the constructive is your opening argument. It'll be 2 minutes long, and it should act like a persuasive essay. So here's my handy dandy tips. One, have a clear plan. It really makes a difference if you respect the writing process. You've been taught the writing process since third grade, probably even earlier, and you've really worked on it, especially in Miss Perez's class. Respect the process. Outline your speech, draft and redraft. It takes multiple edits and multiple drafts to get a good speech. You're not going to get it on the first try. I know there's been plenty of times that I've wanted to write something and walk away from it and say, I'm done. I'm telling you, it won't come out as good. If you want to make a good speech, a winning speech, you're going to have to edit it multiple times. Remember, you should plan on it as being a short 5-paragraph essay. Remember that you should have a clear introduction. You should have 3 body paragraphs that have supporting arguments, 3 different ones in each one. And then you should have a conclusion that restates your thesis, that restates your main idea. Now, if we were doing a full written 5-paragraph essay, those introduction and conclusions would probably be a little bit bigger. But since this is a 2-minute speech, you might have to have a shorter introduction and conclusion so that way you can get to the strong parts of your body paragraphs and supporting arguments. Make sure your thesis is clear and that you use it in your opening and closing paragraphs. You want it to be the frame of your argument, that you hear it in the beginning, you hear it at the end, and that is very clear. What is it that you are trying to prove? Usually, if you take the question you are debating, it's a pretty easy way to make a thesis. So, for example, the example you watched yesterday was me debating whether or not the U.S. should withdraw all forces from Afghanistan. So, if I was the liberal side, my thesis would be the U.S. should pull all forces from Afghanistan. That's what I was trying to prove. If I was conservative, it would be the U.S. should not pull all forces from Afghanistan. Make sense? So take that question and frame it to either if you're in the affirmative, trying to agree with it, or in the negative, saying no to it. 3, your main supporting arguments, you should have 3 of them. And you should have a short paragraph explaining each one in detail. Again, this is a 2-minute speech. I know some of you are excellent writers and can write volumes. I've read it. You're gonna have to be short. Brevity is the form of wit, and you have to be brief and to the point. So you should have nice, compact 3-sentence paragraphs. And then if you have time, add more detail. But these should be 3 short body paragraphs, but that are strong on detail, that have good points that connect to and prove your thesis. I always like to advise my students to plan the order of their supporting arguments. The expression "save the best for last" definitely applies here. Whichever your arguments that you think is the strongest, whichever one you think is the toughest one for your opponent to try to derail, that should be your last one. Save it as your closer in a baseball game, your knockout punch. You want to save that strongest argument to the end, because remember, your audience, the people ultimately will be voting on whether or not to agree on you in the debate. They're the ones that are going to remember that one last. That last point is going to be the one that sticks with them the most when they're thinking about how the speech went. Next, live by the KISS rule. Keep it simple, silly. I know some of you are amazing researchers. I have seen this. That's great. I'm proud of you. But know that a good amount of the information you're finding is not going to get used in the speech. You're writing a 2-minute speech. You're not writing a book. You're not writing a report. You're not writing a normal essay. You're writing a speech. So it has to be short. And the hardest part about your last draft of this is going to have to be eliminating, cutting parts that like you care about, that you think make a good argument. But you're going to have to make hard cuts to get it to 2 minutes. If you don't do this when you're doing the speech, you'll be halfway through and I'll say time. You have to cut and cut and cut to get it to the point where it's in 2 minutes. So keep it as simple as you can. And don't stress what you cut. Remember, the debate has 3 parts. The constructive, the opening speech is just one part of it. You also have a cross-examination, information that you find can be used in that in crafting your questions or answering your questions. And also you have the closing argument. I've found that some information that I wanted to put into the beginning actually worked out better in the end in the summative argument. I always advise that in a speech where you're trying to get people to listen to you and be persuaded, the strongest way that you can persuade people is to connect to their emotions. So you want to try to find a way to do that. There's a few good strategies for that. One, use a quote. You are an 8th grader at a middle school in New Jersey. You're probably very smart, but you're not a world-renowned expert. Find a quote of somebody who's really well recognized and credible and force your opponent to now have to argue against the words of a Martin Luther King or Shakespeare or Malala or Gandhi. Making them have to argue against not just you, but them, puts them in a box. Or let's say not somebody famous, but somebody who's an expert in your field. So for example, I cited in my speech a CIA agent who worked on trying to find bin Laden. That's a pretty credible expert on Afghanistan. So somebody who has a background in the field that you're debating, that gives your argument more credibility. You're just a student. Using their words makes you the expert. Another great way to make an emotional connection is to use a narrative. We're humans. We'd like to be told stories. Since you were little, you like to be told a story, to be brought in. Use a story, a short narrative that gives the facts of your debate a human face. It'll make your audience feel empathy with your argument, with your perspective. And it'll make them sympathize with you more. Is it manipulative? Maybe, but it definitely works. You might remember in my speech, I told the story of the recent veterans who died in Afghanistan. That was by design because I knew that having a narrative, a story, was a great way to tie this together, to make people say, this now is not just this news story. These are real people. That is a real great thing to do. I usually like to save a narrative for the end of a speech or the beginning of a speech to either get the audience's attention, like, oh, wait, what's this about? Now I want to listen, or to really knock them on their feet, like, whoa, at the end of your speech. Narratives, by the way, work really good in a summation. Statistics are a great other thing to use. I can argue with your opinions all night and day, but I'm going to have a much harder time arguing with numbers. Numbers don't lie. They don't bear emotion. They prove facts. And if you present statistics, numbers, that's going to be a lot harder for your opponent to counter. Even better is when you cite really strong, credible resources for those statistics, for those numbers. So it's not just, doesn't sound like numbers that you pulled out of the hat that, oh no, according to the National Federation of Science, according to the American Medical Association. When you cite a really credible resource and give numbers, again, this is a strong tactic to use. Once you write the speech, the real big challenge now is going to be taking your written words and making them into spoken words. Don't just write it and then say, "Oh, I'm done," and then wait until the day you have to debate to speak it. It won't go well. You are going to have to work to craft your speech, and you're going to have to edit it as you're speaking. Oftentimes, you might be saying something, or you might have written down something, and then when you start saying it, it doesn't come out right. It sounds weird. You get tripped up on your tongue. It doesn't flow. So you're gonna have to edit, change the word, and find synonyms to say what you want to say, but to make it as a way that you can say easily. What works on paper doesn't always work coming out of your mouth. So your speech is going to have to be edited again multiple times, even after you think you're done writing it, because you're going to find not everything works now that I'm saying it out loud. Plan on where you're going to emphasize your voice and to make points powerful. Remember, a written argument is a lot different than a spoken one. You have to use your voice as an instrument to make your audience pay attention, to make your audience care, to make your audience connect to what you're trying to say. Avoid being monotonous. Don't speak in the same tone throughout the entire speech. Your audience will go to sleep. That monotony could be you talking slow with no inflection, but it also could be talking really fast and then going really, really fast and talking. That is a form of monotony too. So you want to vary your speed. You want to talk slow at times to draw out your audience and get a point. And sometimes you're going to have to speak faster to give a sense of urgency to what you're saying. The volume of your voice is also important to vary. Give inflection in your voice. Change how your voice sounds. I'm not saying do goofy voices or impersonations. I'm saying change your normal speaking voice just like you would if you were having a conversation to make different things stand out. Practice, 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 practice. And when you think you've practiced this speech enough and you hate it, practice. You need to practice this speech multiple times to get it good. You're never going to get it perfect, but to get it good, you're going to have to practice. The hardest part for this is going to be getting into 2 minutes. And you're going to have to go through and rehearse it to get it down to those 2 minutes. You're going to have to go and have a stopwatch, have people time you. You're going to have to practice it. Maybe even record yourself doing it. Listen to yourself giving it. Watch yourself giving it. It's not an easy thing to do. It's uncomfortable to make a good speech. It is. But if you want to make a good one, you're going to have to practice. Lastly, one of the things I do is I use a teleprompter. Now, I can't afford a big fancy one, but I have a computer. You're going to be on a computer probably using Zoom. So have the computer with your speech instead of on paper where you're fumbling around the paper. Have it on PowerPoint. Have it on Google Slides. So that way you can click through and have your speech right there in front of you. The camera is going to be in the computer, so you can be reading your speech, but also be looking at the camera for the most part at the same time. Plus, you can use that writing to make different parts stand out that you want to give emphasis. Make things bold. Use caps. Use italics. Highlight important parts to make different things stand out. So, there's my tips on writing a good constructive. I hope you use them. Good luck.